Albert Einstein, Chapter 1, Chasing the X. Why do I have to go to school, Papa? Herman Einstein, tall and severe looking, looked down at his 10-year-old son. Do you want to grow up to be an ignoramus, Albert? What's an ignoramus? A burst of laughter came from the corner of the large, comfortably furnished living room. Father and son turned quickly toward Mrs. Einstein, who was seated at the large black piano. "Oh, Herman," Mrs. Einstein exclaimed, her voice still bubbling with laughter. "You'll never beat Albert at that game." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," her husband sputtered. "There's no use in pretending," Mrs. Einstein replied, as she went on playing an old Hungarian folk song. "I heard you and your brother deciding that the only way to keep Albert from asking so many questions was to answer him by asking him a question. But you see, it didn't work. He can always outlast you." Albert crossed the room and stood beside his mother for a moment, forgetting what he had asked. Her fingers fascinated him. They were such stubby, soft little fingers, and yet they danced and fluttered across the keys with the speed of a robin running across the lawn. They hit the keys so firmly without fumbling or hesitation that they made the piano fairly sing. They leaped and pounced upon two final crashing chords. Mrs. Einstein swung herself around on a piano bench and took Albert into her arms. She looked over the top of his dark curly head and smiled up at her husband. "You see, there's a way to make Albert stop asking questions. My music will do it." Mr. Einstein nodded, smiling. Before he had a chance to answer, Albert wriggled around his mother's arm so that he could turn and face her. "Is it wrong to ask questions?" he asked. Now it was Mr. Einstein's turn to laugh. "There he goes again," he chuckled. "Even your music can't stop him for long." Mrs. Einstein looked at her husband reprovingly, and she gave Albert a small hug. "There's nothing wrong in asking questions, Lib Chun," she said fondly, "as long as you don't do it just to tease or embarrass people, or to make them seem foolish." "I don't do it like that," the boy protested. "I do it because there's so much I don't know, so much I want to know. I want to know all about everything right away." Albert's mother smiled proudly, but his father drew his heavy eyebrows together. He looked puzzled. "If you really mean that, Albert, how is it that you could ask why you must go to school? School is the place where questions should be answered." "But they're not," Albert cried out. "They don't even let anybody ask questions, and they'll never think of answering them. I hate school. It's like being in prison. The teachers are like prison guards marching up and down between the rows of desks." Mr. Einstein and his lovely wife exchanged a look that was full of meaning. What could they say and never to their son's charges? This was the year 1889 in monarch Germany. Less than 5 years before, Bismarck, the great German militarist, had conquered all of Bavaria along with several other small countries that had always been free and independent, and formed them all into one country, which he called Prussia. The Einsteins had moved from the little city of Ulm in Bavaria in 1880, a year after Albert was born. The Einstein and his brother Jacob, who had foreseen what would happen to Bavaria, had packed up and brought the whole family to Monaco. There, the two brothers set up a small chemist's shop. They had been there only a year when Albert's little sister Mija was born, and the family moved into a large, comfortable house just outside the center of town. It was not long before the Einstein house, as people called it, became one of the most popular places in the whole city of Monaco. Often, when permanent residents had guests from out of town, they took them to the Einstein house for an evening of conversation and music or poetry reading. These evenings were so much discussed that often visitors to Monaco would, upon arrival, ask their host if they could possibly arrange for an invitation to the Einsteins. An invitation, however, was scarcely necessary. There was nothing formal about these affairs. Sometimes Mrs. Einstein would play Mozart or Brahms compositions. Sometimes she would sing the folk ballads of Germany and Austria. On some evenings the guests all gathered around the piano and sang old songs they all knew. Both Mr. Einstein and his brother had deep, pleasant voices that could lead their guests in these familiar melodies. Many times neighbors and friends gathered just to talk in a warm, friendly living room, with its deep maroon wallpaper, lighted by the orange glow from the gas-like chandelier that hung from the white ceiling. And the evening sped by without allowing time for any music at all. Young Albert hated to go to bed on these occasions. He listened wide-eyed to the talk of new inventions like the electric light and the telephone. His father and Uncle Jacob were well posted on all the latest scientific developments, particularly those which might affect the sale of equipment in electrical chemical apparatus. Their shop was far ahead of their competitors in all such matters. There were times when Albert's father would decide to read aloud from the works of great German writers such as Goethe, Schiller, and Heinrich Heine. Young Albert could never decide which kind of evening at home he liked best. Suddenly there was a great contrast between learning in the friendly atmosphere of his own home and austere school classrooms where the pupils were punished for failure, but never given praise or encouragement for accomplishments. Mr. and Mrs. Einstein spent a good deal of thought in the selection of the school for Albert. He had been backward as a small child, slow to learn to talk and read, and very shy. They had selected a Catholic school considered the very best in Munich. They were dismayed when the government took over the operation of all the schools and began installing military rules and regulations. The true culture of Germany is being submerged by militarism, Mr. Einstein exclaimed sadly. But neither of Albert's parents had realized the extent to which the Prussian army had taken over the public school system until Albert's very real unhappiness became apparent to them. They make us memorize the day's lesson, the boy told them. They don't tell us what it says or what it means, but we must learn every single word. And I can't. Unless I know what a thing means, I just can't remember it. And so, they open the drawer and take out the ruler. His mother hugged him and kissed the palm of his hand. Still red from the strokes of the steel ruler, she looked up at her husband appealingly. Mr. Einstein shook his head. There's nothing we can do, he said. They will question our loyalty if we complain to the principal. He sat down and beckoned Albert to come closer. Albert, he said, placing a friendly hand on his son's shoulder. Your mother and I don't like this any more than you do, but we must all face it. You're old enough now to understand what is going on in the world around you. The army is becoming more and more important in Germany and in Russia and Austria. It will not be long before the army rules the country. Even now, all army officers are buying up big businesses. So far, they have bought only the largest stores. But soon, they will see that Mr. So-and-so has a nice little candy store on the corner. They will buy the store across the street, and they will tell everyone that they must stop buying candy from Mr. So-and-so and must instead buy from the new store. That is the way it usually works out when the military becomes too important. The real reason why you must go to school is that there is a law in Germany that no one may get a job unless he has a diploma. You will have to finish 6 more years of primary school and high school before you can get one, and someday you may have to get a job and help me and Uncle Jacob support your mother and little me job. Albert looked into his father's face and saw that he was not fooling. The situation was serious. I won't complain any more, father, he said. I'll try my best to get along in school. Then he turned and with his head lowered, eyes staring at the flower pattern in the carpet, he started toward the door. In the doorway he turned. Perhaps I could earn money playing my violin, he said. Then I wouldn't have to have a diploma. I'm afraid you would have to practice a long time to learn to play well enough to have people paid to hear you, his mother said as if she were considering the possibility in all seriousness. I wouldn't mind practicing if I knew why, Albert explained, and I don't mind it any more. Albert, his father interrupted, I don't think it would be a good idea. It's never a good idea to do something you love doing just for money. It always spoils it. What's that? What's that I hear? A big voice shouted from the little foyer just outside the living room. It was Uncle Jacob. Herman, did I hear you telling the boy that it was wrong to get money for doing a job you enjoy? That's poppycock, and you know it. Uncle Jacob was a big man, much taller and heavier than Albert's father. His booming voice always seemed to carry a great deal of authority. Now he turned to Albert and addressed him with all the seriousness of a defense attorney, pleading his client's case before a judge and jury. My boy, try to understand what I'm saying. You should always try to do more work you love. And if you find yourself in a spot where you have to do work that you dislike, you must find a way of making yourself like it so that you can do it well. Albert looked doubtful. He shook his head. I hate school, he said stubbornly. Albert, Mr. Einstein said severely, I don't want you to use that word. There's enough hate in the world without hating such a thing as schoolwork. He lapsed into silence as Mrs. Einstein put a quieting hand on his arm. Uncle Jacob crossed over to the fireplace and lifted his long porcelain bowl pipe off the mantel. I think I can show you what I mean, boy, he said. What subject do you hate the most? Albert thought for a moment before answering. I can't decide between algebra and geometry. I dislike them both. Uncle Jacob grinned. There's no reason to hate or dislike either of them. They're both the laziest kind of mathematics. Look, I want you to try something, an experiment. He paused for a moment and Albert waited. Do you ever play policeman or pirates or anything like that? Uncle Jacob asked. Sure. Well, try playing detective for a change. You're looking for a villain. You don't even know whether he's a thief or a pickpocket. You don't even know his name. All you're sure of is that he's somewhere around and you've got to find him to keep him from doing any more harm. First thing you do is give him a name for your files, right? Albert nodded, his eyes glistening with excitement. You call him X. Again, Albert nodded. Then you tell him. You follow him into one formula and out of it, and into another of you, slide down the hypotenuse of a triangle after him, and chase him up the side wall of a parallelogram. Finally, you catch up with him. You find out what he is and who he is. Now you've got him. You put the cuffs on him and take him in. That's all algebra is, or geometry. Like to give it a try? Yes, Albert said earnestly. I would. I think that would help a lot.